There's a funny thing I would tell people. I hate continental breakfast. And I hate continental breakfast because it always comes before some new experience, some orientation. And that is the worst feeling in the world, to be sitting there with a cold bagel and a little yogurt and your coffee, and you got to make friends as an adult. So what I learned over time, though, was that was the opportunity also, because you were on stage whether you wanted to be or not.
Whenever you're dealing with DEI, anything, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. Like I try to not be comfortable or make people think that it's going to be a comfortable process. It's supposed to be uncomfortable because you're changing. And when that discomfort arises, you see the most change and impact.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the Happy Practice Playbook. I'm Mo Jones, and in each episode of the show, you'll hear conversations with dentists, office managers, staff, and specialists who know how to create a happy practice. Today, we are joined once again by Dr. Bilal Beckles and Darryl Jackson, business partners and fraternity brothers who studied their undergrad at Virginia State. Dr. Beckles is a dentist specializing in prosthodontics, and Darryl is the Chief Operating and Growth Officer at Comprehensive Dental Science, as well as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Institute of Management Accountants. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be back. Felt like we never left.
Back like we never left. We're just getting started.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we will just get right into it since y'all have been here. Today's statistic is Hispanic, Black, and Native American dental school graduates made up only around 8.6, 4.7, and 0.4% respectively of the class of 2020, despite representing a larger percentage of the U.S. population. So with that, right, how have you guys seen the difference in diversity in your fields working in dentistry?
I guess I can lead off in that. I think when we talk about diversity, it almost has to pass the eye test first. You know, you kind of go by what you see first, and I think it's very similar to other professions that I've worked in. And as you know, I'm director of DEI at IMA, working with accountants, and it's very similar. I mean, I can say last year, the accounting profession celebrated the 100th year anniversary of the first Black CPA, and it's still under 3%. So you see, you know, it's mirrored image, and I think it has a lot to do with a couple of things. So I've been building DEI programs and initiatives for quite some time, over 20 years. And it needs to be about one of four things, I'd say, or it's just stuff. And you don't want to just do stuff. It has to be about exposure, access, development, or recognition. And I think what has happened to underrepresented people over time is that they haven't been exposed, provided access, developed, or recognized in these fields. And so they've done either one or two things. Either they were stuck at the entry level, or they left the profession altogether. And so, you know, in our roles, in our roles as owning the practice, and you know, in other roles, it's really key. It's imperative that we expose people to dentistry, that we expose them to the various levels of dentistry, that we provide them access to different, you know, programs and you know, things that can help them enhance in their careers and catapult them into other areas. And then finally, once they get exposed and have access, we have to help them develop themselves and become recognized as professionals. So I think that's what you see in various fields. I think, you know, it's similar in the legal field as well. There's just a lack of exposure and access for underrepresented communities.
Yes. And I guess I could speak from being inside of it and that early exposure that I spoke about on the other program in high school. I went through the Urban League, and they were placing me in a hospital, but my mentor, Dr. North, just happened to intercept me, or he was walking out of his operatory when we were walking through the clinic. And that was a matter of seconds. And had I stopped to tie my sneaker, or had he went back in to do something, I would have never been on this path. And so if you think about how fragile or how chance that is for us to be exposed to a field of dentistry, um, and within the numbers, what I'm seeing, it's still about the same from when I entered dental school eons ago. And what I try to do is promote a little, promote more and get people into school, because if it wasn't for another mentor of mine, which is Dr. Dennis Mitchell, who he basically explained to me the steps that I would have to take if I wanted to pursue the career. He also told me, just flat out, as one of our fraternity brothers, he said, "Are you ready for something like this? This is like a process." And he said, like the process that we're familiar with in that area. But he said, you're going to have to go through these things. And when you don't know the field, nor what you have to go through, nor anybody that's necessarily in it, it becomes almost like those hoop dreams. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be these different things, because it's, just because you might have seen a flash of it, but actually getting into it and exposed to it, you're still going to see a small percentage, because there's not a small percentage of us out there. And we have, even in specialties, it goes even lower than that percentage wise. We start to get into the 0.2% and 3%. I have some colleagues of mine that we're all prosthodontists, black prosthodontists, and we have this little kind of bet of how many black prosthodontists are there in the United States. And I say about 50 to 75 in the United States. Some of my colleagues say it's lower than that. It's maybe about 30 or 40 of us in the world, if you really total it. So it is an unexplored area, and it doesn't have as much promotion as it should.
And so, with that, as we're talking about, right, seeing just as professionals and especially people of color, of not seeing people like us in those professions that can lead to that small minimum, would you say that's relatable too? Because I think if you look at any statistics, marginalized people statistically are higher in obesity or health issues and things like that across the board. Do you think there's a correlation with not having professionals of color in those fields that relates to that low number or high number, depending on the statistics of those health related issues?
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, I think in order to have someone help you, and that's essentially what it is when you go to a medical professional, you're going for help, and to have that vulnerable conversation with them, to tell them what's really going on. It typically happens with someone that you're comfortable with, and that comfort level comes from either they look like you, they empathize with you, or something like that. If they don't, then it's a guard. And I've seen it across the board, and we talk about work in different fields. Of course, my work with the practice, we've seen it, but then work with the accountants, with accountants. There's your financial health. So a lot of people feel uncomfortable about discussing their financial, their financial stability with people that don't look like them. And so what that leads to is a lot of bad decisions, a lot of things that get put off, a lot of things that they just aren't educated about. It's unfortunate, but it's up to people like us to try to break those barriers and break those boundaries.
Yes, and I agree 100% with Daryl. Uh, I think one of the biggest issues is one is a lack of knowledge, but the main two issues are fear and I guess adopting different wives' tales or ideas of what an ailment or a problem may be. And so when we start to talk about a pain in our chest, oh yeah, yeah, no, I just had something bad to eat, but this is happening all of the time, or oh yeah, I just couldn't catch my breath for a second because I stood up too fast. And we adopt that as this is now the diagnosis for these issues and these ailments that we're having. And so we treat, oh yeah, yeah, just drink some tea, have a there are old tales that people would do because they had no other options. You don't have a doctor to go to, then yeah, you're going to mix this root with this and that, and then you're going to put a bowl of water under the bed to suck the spirits out. It's all types of things that we adopt because it's deep rooted fear of what it could be. And a lot of times that causes people to shy away from seeking help. And especially when they don't resemble them, they think of it more as criticism over actual helping and healing.
Yeah, and I will dig into this a little bit in a second, but I think, our listeners, I think it's really impactful to understand that, yeah, you may be in a situation where you, because of where you live or your area, you may not be able to have the diversity you want in your office or practice, but it shouldn't be for a lack of trying, because I can just know, I'm speaking for myself. I'm a woman of color in the state of Utah, and I am very much a minority. And it was really hard for a few times, some doctors that I would meet with, just to tell them my experience or concerns. And it just felt like the connection was not there, or my pain or concerns was being just checked off, like, you're not really feeling that or doing that. And so it was just like, how am I supposed to have trust as a patient, right? If even, despite the fact you don't look like me, you don't even trust me. Whereas when I find doctors that look like me and can relate, that they trust me and I have that pain. So all that to say, though, how can someone cultivate an environment with a workplace that is inclusive and diverse?
I think the first thing, and we need to be really clear about it, they really have to be deliberate, have to be intentional. It doesn't happen by chance. It doesn't happen by mistake. Then the other side of it is I think a lot of times as professionals, we get caught up in race and ethnic diversity when there's so many types of diversity. I mean, I really focus on cognitive diversity a lot because that's the diversity that's really important, because that's the diversity which provides different perspectives. And when we think about cognitive diversity, we think about diversity of thought. So it's we're both at this starting line. How do we get to the finish? How do we get to the finish, and at what pace, at what rate, what path do we take? That's the diversity that's really important when making decisions, business decisions. So of course, in my role, I focus on race and ethnic diversity, LGBTQIA, as well as gender diversity. But then there's also other things. There's accessibility issues. There's disability. There's cognitive diversity, what we call diversity of thought. There's geographic diversity, because we want to understand so for instance, in our case, if you're not from Harlem, and you have to take the train to this practice every day, how do you get here? What are your experiences? What are the barriers? What are some things that you face getting to this practice? So, we think of it through a lot of different lenses, but what I have to say, and then what I consult individual businesses about diversity, equity, and inclusion is, number one, you have to be really deliberate, and two, you have to be intentional. And then I think the most important thing is, don't try to boil the ocean. we all of us want to make sure that we're really diverse, we're equitable in opportunity, equitable in pay, we have inclusive environments. But you can't try to do it all at once, because what will happen is you won't do anything good, and your employees will tell you that. And what I've also seen is that when we bring in this diverse set of individuals with different perspectives and different backgrounds, we have to continuously recruit them, because they're always going to find someone that's going to give them a little something better. There's always going to be someone selling them a little something better, but we have to always recruit them and help them understand why this is the best place for them, and also why it's the best place for their development. And Dr. Beckles, of course, in his modesty, as he always is, he tells a story about all his dental assistants have eventually gone on to dental school. And I think that's important, because we want to make sure that those that we bring in our doors, they don't get stuck in those roles. They're not stuck in those roles for 10, 20 years. We want to make sure that they grow. And that's a part of the diversity as well, because we want them to come back and tell the other people that we bring in at the grassroots, at the beginning levels, this is what I had to do to get here, and this is how they helped me get here.
Excellently stated. And I would just say, excuse me, I'm sorry. To add to that, I always try to look within the community as far as giving opportunities to wherever we build, wherever we open, um, because I am a product of that. And then also that inclusivity and and bringing those in, that also brings in other communities. So if we are looking to make a larger impact in New York, as you know, New York is a melting pot. So it's very hard to be strictly within one area, or to look at this particular demographic without looking at it globally, because that's literally what is outside your door. And so in our practice, we have a diverse group. Myself being a black prosthodontist, but also Dr. Moran, our associate, is Dominican, and she also crosses that language barrier that I know a little bit of Spanish and different things like that, but that helps in easing the communication, but also with making people feel comfortable and included in the the whole process of where we're trying to go with things.
And Mo, you brought up some great points, and those statistics that you read off, they're really important. But I just for the audience, I just want to make one important delineation between the quantitative data and the qualitative data. The quantitative metrics tell us what they tell us. They are what they are, and we noticed that that data that you presented us is probably what dentists that are coming in, but it gets even more dismal as you go up. If you look at those that dentists of color that own a practice, dentists of color that are partners, it gets even worse. And so what we really try to do is focus not only on the quantitative data but the qualitative data. We try to have those conversations with individuals. Why are you not coming into dentistry? Why are you not going into medicine? What barriers have you faced in getting into dental school? Those are the things that are most important. It's not the stats that tell us that it's 0.4 this person or 5% of this person. It's why, it's how, it's what, and those are the things that we try to do as older professionals that have experienced a lot of different things throughout our careers. We try to understand the barriers, what they are now, because what they were when I was young aren't what they are now. And so I think in being champions for diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's important that we not focus on the quantitative data, but we really hone in on the qualitative data and have those conversations with individuals that are facing these barriers.
I love that you mentioned that, because I know in several projects that I've been involved with, when it comes to diversity inclusion, right, as you mentioned, it's not just the numbers, that the stories are really part of it. People's experiences and overcoming the barriers they face, maybe because of the lack of diversity and inclusion in these different areas, I think is so important. And so, right, as practice owners, right, and running a business, I think sometimes I say we like I'm part of this, but
You are, you
um,
No,
are.
you
It's a
are.
holistic environment. We
but
love
you
Right.
everyone. Come aboard.
but
Yes,
you've
please.
got a business to run, right? You've got a business to run, and there's numbers, right? You got to look at the numbers and what your overhead and what you're making. So how do you make time for those stories and making sure those experiences are validated and taking that into consideration while essentially maintaining the business aspect and making a profit?
I mean, it's not. I'd have to say it's authentic. It's not like planned. It's like as in passing. And I think that's how you get the honest answers, and you get the honest dialogue. It's not a sit down. Hey, let me speak to you for a moment about this stuff. It's, hey, how are you doing today? What's going on? Are you experiencing any difficulties? What are some of the things that, and all of those, or even the quick conversation by the water cooler. Hey, how's it going today? I heard you trying to do this. What are some of your experiences? And I think those are when we get the really authentic responses. And in my work and in my DEI roles, that's how I've really gotten to the nuts of things. I mean, I can tell you stories of an older woman. She was a senior manager walking into a room to present to her peers, and they asked her, did she bring the coffee? Or, two Spanish women in a hallway speaking Spanish, and another woman comes by and say, hey, here, we only speak English. Things that we thought don't happen anymore. They're still happening. Or, a gay Asian male, his boss telling him if he wanted to move up in the company, he had to act more straight around the CEO. These things are still going on, but no one is going to tell you that if you sit down and do an interview with them. It's things that, as a man of color, as a person of color, that they express their frustrations. And I share their frustrations with them, because in my roles, I think that we've climbed this hill and we're this way, we're this far up. Little do I know that there are still people lagging behind. So it's really an educational aspect where you have to be really empathetic and hearing what they're going through, but then understanding where the champions are, where the key pieces in the playing field, that we can go and have those conversations with them, to make it a little bit easier for them and to break down some of those barriers.
Yes, and also the the focus on growth. we're transparent about our vision, and how we want to see and where we want to go with things. And when the staff is around or just in communication, but like Darryl had stated before, I look at the people that come work for me, that this is not where you're staying. Like you're going to come in at this point, but I need you at this point next, and I need you at this point. And oftentimes they hit that ceiling, and then they go, "Well, I'm just going to go off to dental school." Well, I'm going to help you with that too, because what that's going to do is that's going to not only show that individual, a new pathway, a new life, but it also shows your staff that, listen, this is where we can go to. And when you start showing them things that are beyond their limits, not with arrogance but with like achievement, they start to move and start seeing that vision and start moving in that same direction as you. And so I find that to be uh beneficial over the time that I've been out. It's just been, hey, listen, if you know this, you're going to know this by the time you're done with me, and you're going to want more by the time you're done. So I think that requires us, turning over our staff, but everybody that's in there, they value it, they work harder for it, and they see the bottom line themselves. If this grows, that means it grows bigger for everyone else. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Dr. Beckles and I, we're really sensitive to the concept of intersectionality as well. We understand that people aren't just one thing one at a time. Like there are a bunch of things all of the time. So we try to be really sensitive to understand that this woman that came from Brooklyn, that's not only a black woman, she might be a mother, she's a Christian, she's all of these things, and she's bringing this whole person to work. And when this person sits down in this seat, we have to be really sensitive to who that person is. And so we really have conversations about that all the time, and just being really sensitive to our staff and who they are as total people, not just who they are at one point, one time.
I think too, being sincere about it, because I know, I think you guys get the feel when someone's just trying to ask you about your experience or life, because they kind of treat you like a token person. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think having that genuine conversation that you're really just trying to to know a person is going to yield so much better results and be able to get you the information to make your practice better or your business. Not just. I think this is applicable to anyone across the board. And so with that, cancel culture, huge thing, right? So
Yeah.
when we're doing this, we'd be really careful. So I think a lot of our listeners are probably, they want to do this. They want to have better diversity and inclusion, but there's that fear that they could do something and not even be intentional and they get canceled. And then it just kind of, everything goes to crap. So what would you guys say is a good first step in being intentional with this, that they could help maybe avoid that cancel culture, but still being intentional and making an impact versus, you know,
Yeah, I would say in the recruitment process, certainly casting a wider net, and being sensitive to what other underrepresented groups might not have. So, for instance, and doing a lot of work and building these programs and initiatives, a lot of times they're in person. Well, how do I know that this person can get here in person? How do I know that they have transportation? So, making things more virtual, making webinars more virtual, making things a lot easier to access. I think the other thing is really keeping in mind that you don't have to know it all. Obviously there's a lot of resources, but there's also this thing called the question mark. Ask the question. Don't assume. And I think that's where a lot of people get in trouble, is that they make assumptions, and those assumptions turn into biases, and those biases turn into stereotypes, where if you don't have the assumption, you can nip it at the bud at that point. And not having that assumption is really the foundation of being inclusive, because you're not taking anything for granted. And I think the first step to all of this is really being vulnerable enough with yourself to allow yourself to be uncomfortable enough to ask the question. Say, and it doesn't have to come off crazy. Just, hey, I haven't been exposed to this. I was wondering if you could explain to me what this means. Or I've heard this has been an issue in this community, but I just don't understand it. Can you explain this to me? And then that leads into a whole separate dialogue where you may have learned something about an individual that you didn't even intend. So I think when we speak about first steps and we speak about something small that can be done, I think just eliminating the assumption and asking the question is the first thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I literally, I was just going to say sensitivity and communication, which was running along the same lines that you know be comfortable enough to communicate, but sensitive enough to understand where people are coming from, and to that kind of levels things, as far as my experience, that kind of level things out as far as getting over obstacles and getting around challenges and stuff. So as long as we can communicate and we can be sensitive to each other's overall being, then we have better results.
And I think, especially with us owning the dental practice and just in healthcare period, most medical professionals, they have a thing called bedside manner. And what that is it's being sensitive. It's being, understanding that everyone isn't the same, and understanding they might have questions. So I think most healthcare professionals have it built in to their DNA, if you will, that they are diverse, inclusive, and equitable by nature, because they have to be. But I think what happens on the flip side is when we start looking at staff and not patients, we become that lens becomes removed, and then we look at it a little bit differently. But I think if healthcare professionals keep that same lens that they have at the bedside when they're dealing with their staff and their teams, it could take them a long way.
So, and what you guys have shared too, I think it's very apparent that fostering diversity and inclusion elevates a practice, any
Oh
kind of
yeah,
practice, right?
Absolutely.
And so,
definitely.
and I think you guys have given great examples of how it's elevated your practice. But I would love for you guys to share, in other instances, not your practice, but where you've been a patient or a client that has practiced this diversity inclusion and how it elevated your experience.
Wow. You want me to go first, Dr. B, or you want to take a stab?
No, no, no. You go first because you're using the better words.
Yeah, I mean, I have a whole lot of them. So I'll speak about why I got into this work, and it was really influential for me because I saw how it affected generations. So I was when I came out of college, I was a loan officer for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and my job was to give loans to farmers that couldn't get loans from anywhere else. And at the time, the black farmers in Virginia were going through something because they weren't getting the loans. They were losing their land, and the white farmers were buying that land and putting up cell phone towers and getting millions of dollars. And what that showed me was, wow, this is not fair. And anyone who gets into DI work, it all starts off with fairness. And we come to quickly realize that the world isn't fair, but you have to build in things and institutions that make it more fairer, if for lack of a better term. But that's what it showed me, that it takes someone to drop a pebble in the pond and cause those ripples before anything happens. And I take pride in being that pebble, regardless of where it is. And in another instance, when I was working at the headquarters of our fraternity, we were noticing that people of color weren't getting hired into these visible roles. They were getting put in roles that were supported or administrative roles, but not in the visible roles. And so we created a program called College Life to Corporate Life for our fraternity brothers, our college fraternity brothers. And it excited me that I was going to help mold and shape an individual's career at this early stage. And we had companies lining up to sign up, like Kraft, PepsiCo, Wells Fargo, Cornell University, countless others. And what they were doing was we're giving our college brothers entry level positions, but not keeping them there, challenging them to grow. And then today I see one of the young brothers that were in that program, and I was there back in 2000 and whenever it was. He's now the mayor of Little Rock, and so it just shows, if you pour into people at an early stage, you provide them with an aura of invincibility that carries on throughout their careers, and I try to carry that into the practice every day, because again, our three strategic pillars are, of course, practicing, but thought leadership and philanthropy. And DEI is the umbrella that hovers over all of that. And when we look at those pillars, we always keep that DEI lens on, because we want to make sure that we are force multipliers and we're not keeping anything in place. We want to make sure that what we do will resonate long after we're gone, or retire. I shouldn't say gone.
Yeah, and I would say for me, mine is like Daryl, a lot of experiences with the different institutions that I attended, and I would always tell people, if they let me in a room, I'm gonna jimmy the lock. I'm gonna put some gum in there, or put my foot in the door, because I'm bringing people in. You have to understand that. So it it at first coming from Harlem and then going to Virginia State, it was like, this is an amazing experience and these are wonderful people and I need more people to come down here. So I worked at admissions and I saw applications, I made calls, and I was like, here, let's get this person in and that person in. Then when it came to Howard, it was similar. You start seeing less people of color, but you see the advantages and the opportunities, and so you want to bring as many people as you can through. And then with Columbia University, once you start to get to the height of your career in your field, that's when you really start to see, okay, it's not enough of us. When you're the only person in the room, when you get some of those uncomfortable questions or whatever, you have to play it off for some political conversation that a lot of times it's a test. How's this guy going to answer it? And you learn over time. You can bug back, and then there's issues. You can cower away, and there's issues, or you can stand your ground on who you are, and that takes a whole lot, especially kind of going through the path that you do. So for me, it was all of these experiences and understanding where I stood in the room and how much I needed to put forward to make my presence known. And so when it comes down to whether it's staff or the practice itself, and we're looking at diversity, I know that person walking into a room, how much it's taking for them to stand in the room with me or with somebody that is different from them, that may have a levels above them, so to speak. So I'm very conscious, and again, using that word again, sympathetic, empathetic with um, their situation. And that's how kind of like the DEI formulated in my head just over my experiences over time.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think the flip side of that, and I'm sure we all experience it, is the flip side of that is walking into the room and being expected to speak for the whole black community and the whole black race. But and at times, sometimes I want to, but then I have to fall back and be like, Darryl, you're Darryl
Yeah,
Jackson.
yeah,
This is your role. This is your lane. But I think that's a challenging aspect of it as well. When you walk into a room with people that don't look like you, sometimes they expect you to speak for everyone,
yeah,
and that's not fair to you or to them, because that's going to cause them to form some assumptions that may not be accurate, and the beginning of some biases, because it might not, they might not agree or like what you said. So I think the flip side of the coin is that as well, is not trying to speak for everyone, but speaking for what you know and staying in your lane.
yes,
Man, y'all got me crying in the club over here, with your experiences. But I think what you guys are both leading to is, sometimes, right, when we're on this effort of diversity inclusion, we really just kind of have to rise where we stand. But I think both your examples show that when we do that, when we are lifting up other people, and it's a small ripple. It may just be one person, one small thing, but it's a ripple effect, and it brings up, that spreads. It brings up communities. It brings up areas. And, eventually, like, this probably, sounds crazy, but it's like eventually that brings up the whole world, because it just spreads as we continue to grow and lift. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, right, the world is not just one single thing, one mind thought, all of that. It's always going to be different, and it's always going to be changing. So we need to
Absolutely.
create spaces that are inclusive for those, whether it's race or, sexual orientation or accessibility. All of that needs to be inclusive. And I think too, when we think about diversity and inclusion, I think a lot of times we get pigeonholed into just thinking it's just about race and ethnicity, and it's so much more than that. So seeing the whole wheel.
Yep.
yes,
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that we take pride in, as being alpha men, is we take pride in being the scholars. So we really think things through, and we really try to think of what I try to do. I'm not going to speak for all of us again. We're not going to fall into that. What I try to do is I try to think of it from a change management perspective, because when we think of change, change is disruptive. So I try to think of it as what is the current state and what is the future state? What are we looking at? Even though it may be a utopian vision, we try to build towards it, and I think that helps us as well. And then finally, whenever you're dealing with DEI anything, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. Like I try to not be comfortable or make people think that it's going to be a comfortable process. It's supposed to be uncomfortable because you're changing. And when that discomfort arises, you see the most change and impact.
Yes, and what Darryl was just speaking of, there's a funny thing I would tell people. I hate continental breakfast, and I hate continental breakfast because it always comes before some new experience, some orientation, and that is the worst feeling in the world to be sitting there with a cold bagel and a little yogurt and your coffee, and you got to make friends as an adult. So to like what I learned over time though was that was the opportunity also because you were on stage whether you wanted to be or not. I was at a meeting where I was the only black doctor in a room of 500 people, and well, except for the guy that was serving the food. And I remember I said I called my brother and I said, "This is like Get Out. I don't know. Everybody is watching me because I'm walking with my plate, and the whole room is like this." And it wasn't not because I'm in a room full of people that don't like me or whatever, but there were curiosities and things of that nature. But when you're on that stage, you could either, kind of bail because the
Well,
first
yeah.
time I went, I was like, I'm out of here. I'm going to my hotel and I'm ordering in and I'm watching a movie because this is uncomfortable. And I don't know if I spoke with, I think I called you.
Yeah, you called me.
Yeah,
You
I
called me.
called you.
Yeah,
No, I
yeah.
swear to, I called him and I'm sitting here, I got all my degrees. I'm as qualified as everyone in the room, but and maybe even more. But I'm sitting there almost as a moving sculpture, and I felt so uncomfortable, and it felt cold. And
Do you remember the
I've
advice
never.
I gave you? Do you
I
remember the advice I gave you?
wait, say that. No. You say it so everybody else can hear it. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I told you, you got, can I use bad words? I can't use bad words. You got to walk through that MF like you own that place. They don't know
Yes,
you from a hole in
yes,
the wall.
yes,
They don't know you
yes.
from a hole in the wall. You better walk through that place like you are the doctor's doctor. Like you, and I've experienced the same thing, but I've been on the stage presenting. I'm presenting to a whole white audience, or I wouldn't say white, but non-black audience. And, I had to, first you get a little uncomfortable, your pits start sweating, you're like, oh my gosh, am I going to fall? And then, everyone tells you to think of everyone naked in the room. That makes you feel more comfortable, but that doesn't work at all. You just have to realize they don't know me from a hole in the wall. So I can be whoever I want to be in this place. So, that's
And
what
that,
helped me.
and I was standing at the top of the staircase when he said this at this fancy hotel, and I'm like, I am gone. And he's like, oh, you need to go back in there, and boom. And I turned around. I went, I grabbed a glass of, a little whatever they were serving, and I walked back into that room. And it was a different feeling. I was moving a little different. You got a little bop, a little swag, and then it started to warm up because it was, I think, maybe they haven't seen uh, a black guy in this meeting in a long
No, I
time.
think they smelled your fear. They smelled your fear. They
Maybe
smelled the fear.
I don't know. No, it was so. It was so. I mean, it literally. Just watch Get Out. If you watched Get Out, it literally felt like that. And I was like, oh, I'm from Harlem. I'm born and raised. I'm tough, I guess. But then when you walk in a room and everybody is just like, boom, right on you, it's a bit off putting. And that, but that was a learning moment,
Yeah,
and that was a time that I also, and I want the viewers to understand this. It doesn't matter what level you get to, you're never beyond taking counsel. You're never beyond learning and communicating and asking for help, because here I'm shaking in my boots, so to speak, and I had to make a call to get my mind right. You belong there. This is what you need to do.
yeah,
Yes, I belong here, and this is what I need to do.
yeah,
And that
yeah,
drove me forward. So you can't be too arrogant to think that, oh, I'm big time this or big time that, and I don't need anybody's help, because we always do. We always. So yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I also told him to find the person in the room that everyone thought was, that person, and go and shake hands with that person and say, hey, I love what you said about such and such. And then, that creates a conversation. Then everyone sees you speaking to that person and you become that person.
You said
So
find the
when
biggest person in the room and knock them out.
yeah,
Wasn't
that
that?
too.
No,
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 it
that
wasn't
was in
that.
a different, that was in a
No, that's
different
a
environment. That was somewhere else.
Listen, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, right?
Yeah, yeah. Great
Well,
advice.
we are almost out of time, so we're just gonna leave our listeners with a motivational tip, and our listeners are in for a treat because they are getting another page out of your playbook of success. So, what do you have for our listeners today?
Wow. I went first last time, Dr. B. You go first this time. Or did you go first last time?
I don't know. You went first last time. I got this one. I do this one. Um, know your value. Know your value. The biggest accomplishment you could have is knowing your value, and the biggest failure you could have is not knowing your value, because it can leave you stuck in situations that you are beyond. You're better, and if you can't see that, and that next step at that next level, it doesn't necessarily exist. So when you know your value, you know how long you should be somewhere, or where you should be at, and what your next steps are. And I think that's key in just overall life, period.
I think I would leave the listeners with one of my rules that I go by, and I call it the 24-hour rule. You have 24 hours to feel sorry for yourself, or 24 hours to celebrate success. After that, move on, because no one cares. And I like to think that I practice um, the practice of effort, and I say effort because when things go bad, you get 24 hours, and then you have to say effort and move on, because stress kills, stress debilitates, stress keeps you local, stress keeps you in the same place that you always are. And I feel like without people, a lot of times we get really stressful, and we get hindered by what we can accomplish, and that can come through something bad or something great happening. So we can wallow in our success too much, or we can wallow in our misfortune too much. And I would just say to listeners, practice that 24-hour rule. You get 24 hours to celebrate, or 24 hours to wallow in your miseries, and after that, move on, because there's so much more to accomplish.
Definitely.
So, valuing yourself and allowing space to feel and then keep moving forward.
Go.
Absolutely.
Love it. All right. Well, that is a wrap for today. Thank you so much for being with us once again, Dr. Beckles and Darryl. It has, as always, it's been a ride. It's been
Yes,
great.
indeed. It's been a
Yes,
ride.
yes,
Good,
yes.
bad, or indifferent. It's been a ride.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone listening. Don't forget to join the Happy Practice Playbook Facebook group, where we'll be discussing this topic more and sharing other helpful resources to help you keep your people happy. And as always, I'll be posting to get all of your tips and tricks as well. If you like what you heard today, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next episode. We hope you'll join us next time. It's your girl, Mo Jones.